Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered How to Edit Seals Part 5. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Almost no one could hear the eternal rain falling from the sky. This place was called Aimgakure no Sato because it always rained. The rain did a good job of hiding this place. It was the perfect place for these kinds of people and for her. When the silk of her cloak touched her skin, it was cool and sent small tingles down her spine. Her shirt didn't make it through the trip. By the time she got to the place where the skies are always gray, it was in pieces. Her pants didn't fare much better, but she was able to fix them. Now, they fit her hips like shorts and only went up to mid-thigh. Even so, it was better than nothing. She had very little when she started her journey and hadn't had a chance to get things on her own yet. It had already been 2 months, but it took her 3 weeks to get here. There had been no ways for her to get money so she could buy a new wardrobe. She was lucky that she had been given a lot of cloaks, which she could use until she could find proper clothes. What little money she had on her when she left was used to get her here, and the money a redhead slipped into her shuriken pouch because she wouldn't take no for an answer when it came to helping her out was used right away to buy extra underwear. She would give the young man a piece of her mind for putting the money in her pouch when she didn't want to take it from him, but she would also give him a big hug for helping her, even though the cold fabric was rubbing against her chest every time she breathed. Thinking about the boy made her feel warm. He only knew about her through his mother, who had left him, but he didn't hesitate to help her that night. She did not know much about the young man. That much was true. She had seen him a few times when she went to Kushina, but they had never talked. It was a thought that made me feel bad about what I had done. If they had spent more time together, would she have grown closer to him? Would she have been the boy's aunt or even his second mother? It was a mischance now that he wasn't the little boy who used to hide behind his mother's legs and refused to leave because he was afraid for her safety. No, he had always been quiet and shy, like her own son Itachi, but the Naruto who comforted her that night had grown up a lot. When you think about how mature he was even before Kushina took his sister and left Konohagakure no Sato with her, that says a lot. He had good reason to be so grown up, though. After all, he was the man of the house. He had to take care of his mother and sister, even though he wasn't ready for such a big job and his mother was perfectly capable of running the household. In the end, it wasn't those actions that had changed him, but that way of thinking, that view of the world that was already so full of duty and responsibility. Or, that's what Kushina told her once as they sat in the back garden on a Sunday afternoon and watched Naruto run around chasing butterflies. Naruto had instead been sitting nearby, close enough to be there but far enough away that he couldn't hear what the adults were talking about. He had a lot of books around him that day, but he rarely looked at them. No, he wasn't reading to keep himself busy. Instead, he was keeping a close eye on his sister as she had fun. As he looked at her, his lips didn't move up, but the weight he had put on himself made them pull down into a small frown. She could still remember the look in his eyes, the way he wanted to join her in her carefree afternoon. But he had stayed sitting near the table. The boy had almost always done what was best for his family, and he wouldn't think twice about giving up what he wanted for the happiness and well-being of the 2 women in his life. And the fact that it was true only made her madder at Kushina. The Uzumaki cared about 2 things more than anything else, their word and their family. Even so, Uzumaki Kushina, the leader of the Uzumaki clan, decided to leave her son behind while she and her daughter traveled around the elemental nations. Couldn't she have brought him to the Uchiha compound to live with her for a few years? She didn't want to involve Naruto in her clan problems at that time. But Kushina would have known something was wrong and might have been able to get her and her son out of there. Okay, so maybe some of her anger came from being hurt, but she knew how hard it would have been to leave her sons behind. Even when Itachi went on his regular patrols around the village, she worried until he came back. How could Kushina have explained what she did? She knew, though, that the woman had to have a reason. She wasn't so stupid as to think the worst of the woman right away. Kushina may have been impulsive and quick to anger, but even she wouldn't have left her son behind without a good reason. Kushina had left him for whatever reason, but maybe that was for the best. If she hadn't told him, he wouldn't have been there to give her shelter and comfort on that terrible night. Who knows if she would have been able to leave Konoha alive. Even if she had gotten away, there would be no reason for her to live. Tensions within her clan had made it hard for her to think of the Uzumaki head as a friend because of how close they used to be. That might be why Naruto wasn't left with her, which turned out to be a very good thing. Itachi may have betrayed the clan, and Sasuke may have been lost during the clan's destruction, but Naruto was still there. She might not have been the boy's real mother, and she had no plans to try to replace the woman. but by the gods, she would do what she could for the last person she had. She only spent one night with him, crying and sleeping. Even though she didn't know him, she knew more about him than she did about anyone else. She really didn't have anyone left. She wasn't alone, though. No, not entirely. Even though he couldn't be there with her and she couldn't do anything to help him right now, the warmth in her chest reminded her that he was still there and would always be there if she ever needed him. It was a nice and comforting feeling that let her know that, despite everything that had happened, not everything was lost. This feeling of love reminded her a lot of how she felt about her sons, how she used to feel about Kushina, and how she used to feel about Fugaku before the stress and pressure of being the head of the Uchiha clan turned him into a cold, power-hungry monster. She blamed the man her husband had turned into for the clan's recent problems, mostly their extinction, but she blamed the clan for making the man in the first place. It really was a cycle of bad behavior that led to their own demise. There were now only two left. But with only two Uchiha left, what were the chances that they would both end up in the same country, the same city, the same place? What about fucking across the room? She stood behind Zetsu, and when she looked over his shoulder, she could see her oldest son standing across from her and staring at Pain with no interest. Every time she saw him, the nice warmth in her chest turned into a white-hot inferno of anger. He had betrayed the clan, but what was worse was that he had taken everything she had. The only thing about him that was even a little bit good was that he had led her to Naruto by taking away everything she had and everything she used to be. This man, no, this dog in front of her was not her son. Naruto was, and she would stay here and watch over him to keep him safe. She didn't know exactly what they wanted yet because her backer hadn't told her, but it was worth keeping an eye on since so many S-rank shinobi were involved. Pain said something, and Zetsu moved out of the way so that those in the circle could see her, but she didn't mind being seen. Everyone thought Uchiha Mikoto had died, and since she was wearing a mask, no one could see her face. As the newest member of Akatsuki, led by Zetsu, "Do you have anything to say?" asked the leader of AIM, his purple eyes calmly looking at her. Pain was the only person in the room, besides Zetsu, who knew who she was. Even though he didn't know her real name, he did know who sent her here with the half-plant. After tilting her head to the side for a second to think, she nodded yes. She jumped on the balls of her feet and shook her hips like a child. The words she said rolled off her tongue and out of her mouth like a song, even though the orange porcelain that covered her face made it hard to see her face. Tobai is a good girl. Keigo and Ren have come back from their mission, which they say went well. Naruto nodded at his desk, where he was hiding behind stacks of paper. "Thank you, Mai. Tell them to get some rest. They've been doing missions back to back for 2 weeks now. Of course, Naruto-sama. Do you need anything before I go?" He looked through stacks of papers for a few minutes before pulling out a folder, which she quickly grabbed. "This is the updated mission list. Put it up in the assignment office. If you see Sai, tell him he's terrible with money and I need to talk to him again about going over budget." "Yes, Naruto-sama. Is that all?" He thought for a moment and then smiled sweetly at her. "Would you mind having some food sent up? I've been stuck in here all day trying to fix Sai's mess." The young man was a very skilled shinobi and had a way with the troops, but he didn't understand money at all. If Mai hadn't helped him run the store with him, it would have closed within the first week. The young girl's lips moved up into a small smile from a calm frown. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you eat. But next time, I expect you to take a break by telling me we're going out to lunch." Naruto looked up at the clock, which said 4:30, and then back at the stacks in front of him. After struggling for a minute to decide, he finally hung his head and sighed. At the time, there was just too much to do. "Yeah, maybe next time," he said with a sad nod. She tried not to laugh and reached for the door. "I'll be back in about an hour, Naruto-sama. Good luck with your work." She shut the door behind her, leaving Naruto alone in his makeshift office. Naruto let out another big sigh and let his eyes wander around the room. Sad to say, there wasn't much to see. The walls were plain, with only a clock on them, and there were no windows to look out of. A bookshelf and a filing cabinet were tucked into a corner. The only light in the room came from a lamp by the door and one on his desk, so most of his office was in dangerous shadows. He'd have to figure out how to fix that. But they were already talking about getting a proper building for the pack to live in. Maybe he should put that off for now, since they didn't have a lot of money to spend on whatever they wanted. They only had a small amount of money, so they had to be careful with it. That's why he was so annoyed that Sai couldn't stick to the budget he had given her. Well, there was no point in crying over spilled milk, so he would just have to make sure it didn't happen again and send Sai on a few missions to pay for the extra costs. Of course, saying that made it sound a lot easier than it was. They were trying to keep a low profile at the moment, so they weren't getting a lot of requests. No, they had to find the requests themselves. They did this by carefully getting in touch with people who were having trouble, and were thinking about going to a hidden village for help. One could even say that they were stopping missions, which wasn't an easy thing to do. It also didn't pay Naruto nearly as much as he would have liked. Shinobi did take on the missions, but they weren't from any village. So, they were below a village that could send help and above a group of mercenaries. So, even though the pay wasn't too bad, they should have gotten a lot more, which would have made things a lot easier. Well, he couldn't do anything about it right now, not until they were well established and ready to defend themselves against any would-be attackers. Since this was the world of the shinobi, they would come crawling out of everywhere as soon as they heard that another group was trying to get started. They were easy pickings right now, so there was no point in luring those who could rip out their throats to attack. At least a year would pass before they could really get started, but that was fine. It would take some time to get used to this and figure out how to set things up correctly. He was going to be a shinobi, so he wouldn't be able to play such an active role while he was focused on his job. He didn't have the freedom that Danzu did because he wasn't retired. Even though, to be fair, the Warhawk did deserve it. Naruto was lucky to have people he could trust to run things while he was away. Sai was terrible with money, but he was a good leader for the wolves. He also had a knack for knowing which missions would go well and which would need more shinobi or ready backup. They usually stayed away from those. Mai, on the other hand, was great at keeping track of everything that was going on and managing the budget. He thought Sai was great and was happy to have met the pale young man. But he liked Mai a lot more. Without her, they wouldn't be doing nearly as well as they are. That doesn't mean they would be in big trouble without her, but the fact that she was there helped them make a lot of progress very quickly. Both of them had shown him that they could be trusted and were good at what they did. But he couldn't deny that he liked Mai more than Sai. Since he started this pack, she was like his personal assistant, and he enjoyed being around her a lot. This didn't feel like something Tatsuki or Mito had, but more like a friendly friendship between two people who liked the feeling of not being alone. Even though, like Hinata, he felt like he had to protect her, partly because he was her leader. He also knew that she could take care of herself and his pack while he was gone. It was a welcome change that really helped him. The fact that they were close but still had their own lives made every conversation easy. He didn't have to tell her what was bothering him, and she didn't have to tell him what was bothering her. Just two people getting away from their problems by spending time with someone nice. It was like wiping the slate clean before life served up the next set of problems to deal with. If she left, like others he had grown close to before, he would miss her, but he also felt like it would be much easier for him to accept. There were no sad feelings connected to her, only happy memories, and for that, he was thankful. He wasn't sure if he could do it all over again. He knew, too, that he wouldn't have to. Some of his wolves were so devoted to him that they were almost fanatical, and they would not leave his side. Because their seals had been changed, he never had to worry about them betraying him. Even though it wasn't necessary, it helped put his mind at ease. No, his wolves were the only people he could count on. They were a strong base that helped him stay on his feet in this crazy life. And just like they took care of him, he'd take care of them. It made me feel like I had a family again. The drink was quickly poured and even quicker drunk. Hiruzen set the empty glass down and thought about having another drink. He'd already had 4 drinks this afternoon and knew that if he had another 1 or 2, he wouldn't be able to work. He didn't want to deal with the last of today's paperwork because he knew he'd have a mountain of new papers waiting for him in the morning. At the same time, he shouldn't have done anything to help run Konohagakure no Sato after having 2 drinks. He hadn't been doing much of his work anyway because he was too busy thinking. Since his lunch break, he hadn't done any of his work. Instead, he had been staring out the window at the village he loved so much. It didn't solve any of his problems. There were problems that mostly affected the only redhead in the village, even though most of them were technically with the Yamanaka clan and their mysterious attackers who used the image of the wolf to identify themselves. He wasn't a fool. Had he ever done something wrong? Mistakes in important situations. Of course, who hasn't? He was old, though not blind. Even after Naruto gave the dead body of Inoichi's sister to the man, he could see that the Yamanaka were fine. The wolves didn't start causing trouble for the Mindwalker clan until Naruto gave up his Uzumaki name and said that the Yamanaka heiress was his enemy. Could it be a fluke? Yes, it is possible. It could be anything from a coincidence to bad timing to perfect timing. He wouldn't say for sure that this group was using the boy's confession to make people think he did it. but he also wouldn't say for sure that Naruto hadn't found some very skilled allies to help him in his little war against the Yamanaka. He knew it would be a mistake to underrate Naruto's skills. Hiruzen did not need to be convinced that the boy could do something like start his own private army. He knew that the boy had a lot of potential and that he could do something as simple as that. He found out the dark truth about one of Konoha's biggest secrets only a few hours after it happened. No one, civilian or soldier, should have thought less of him. Then there was the fact that his ANBU all seemed to like the boy a lot. Some might even say they were too nice to him, since they let him into the Uchiha district and didn't stop him, even though Hiruzen had told them not to. Gods above, they had gone against his orders in a dangerous situation because they liked the young man's shinobi-like attitude. It didn't end there either. Since Naruto became the Yamanaka's sworn enemy, the ANBU has been against the Yamanaka clan. When it came to Konohagakure no Sato's and Satsu Senjutsu Tokashu Budai, you didn't want to be the target of anger. Luckily, things hadn't gotten too bad. Well, it was mild because no one was seriously hurt. During training, there had been a few accidents that seemed strange, but Hiruzen had no way of knowing if some of them were real accidents or if ANBU agents were lashing out. There were other ways they struck back, though, like sudden reevaluations that ended careers and got Yamanaka clan members kicked out of the ANBU forces. They turned a blind eye to anything that happened near the clan compound or even if it involved one of their own blood. Most of the time, they favored anyone who wasn't a Yamanaka, which led to a lot of Yamanaka getting in trouble or even being forced to retire early. The Mindwalkers were not happy, but Hiruzen couldn't do much about it. Usually, the Mindwalkers would have taken care of situations like this, and that was where the problem started. Even if they got a Mindwalker who was honest, they wouldn't know if the person being questioned was hiding something. Because of this, he had to take the ANBU agents at their word, which they all would. It also hadn't gone unnoticed. People in the village were aware of the tension and seemed to side with the ANBU most of the time. This made it harder for the Yamanaka clan to stay in the village, which was eerily similar to what happened before the Uchiha massacre. Hiruzen would have to check if Itachi's Black Ops team was behind this. He wouldn't be surprised if that's how they were putting it. The similarities could also be caused by Naruto himself. Hiruzen shook when he thought about it. He knew Naruto was very smart, but the thought that he might be leading and moving Hiruzen's forces in a way that would reenact one of Konoha's worst tragedies and risk letting the secret out was not a good one. In fact, it was fucking scary as hell. That was also just his ANBU. It gave a clear picture of what the wolves had been doing. It started out pretty harmlessly, with members going missing for a few days and then coming back completely unharmed. It didn't change much about their lives, but it made everyone in the clan nervous and wonder if the next person to be taken would come back hurt, if they came back at all. It was good that Inoichi had told him everything, because if he hadn't, he might have been worried about what would happen. But just because Naruto said things wouldn't hurt anyone, that didn't mean he couldn't do a lot of damage. For example, the clan treasury had been completely emptied. No one knew how the wolves did it, but they not only took everything without being seen, but they also put rotting boar bodies in the vault and painted a snarling wolf on the outside of the treasury door in red. If not for that picture and the large amount of blood that leaked out from under the door where the wolves had poured their blood on the boars, the Yamanaka probably would have never known. Even so, the whole village still didn't. Most of what the wolves did to the Yamanaka clan was never found out. The Mindwalkers weren't about to show weakness by admitting what was happening to them. Shinobi found it hard to avoid being weak. Whether you were an ally or not, they would use you for as long as they could. And if anyone found out that the Yamanaka clan was currently fighting and losing to a civilian child, whether or not the child was a child of Kushina, their reputation would be ruined. They already had trouble getting missions, and now they didn't have any money to fall back on. If they lost the few missions they had been able to get, they would have no way to make money, and the clan would go broke. It was already going well, and the fact that a 10-year-old girl was in charge didn't help. Inoichi had said that it was part of his deal with Naruto, who may or may not have been working with the wolves, that she would lead the clan so that he could fight with her through the Yamanaka. There was something else about being a life lesson. But Hiruzen was too busy at the time with the fact that a 10-year-old was in charge of one of Konoha's most important clans to pay much attention after that. But besides these events and the occasional utility being sabotaged, there was only one other event worth mentioning: the rape of Renji. The wolves took a few women, knocked them out, stripped them naked, and left them chained up in Yamanaka Renji's basement. They were found 3 days later, after the ANBU got a tip from someone who didn't want to be identified. The women didn't remember anything he did to them or even meeting him, but that was part of the fun. People thought that their memories had been changed because the Yamanaka were so famous for their mind arts. Because it was a Yamanaka, they couldn't have anything checked, or rather, they couldn't believe anything any of the mindwalkers said. This news didn't stay within the clan, especially since the women involved were Konoha residents and the Yamanaka no longer had the money to pay them to keep quiet. The only way Hiruzen knew what had happened was because Yamanaka Ino, the clan heiress, had found a box in her room with the underwear of the women and a painting of a pack of wolves under the moon, each of them staring at the viewer with angry red eyes. Of course, that also made Hiruzen feel better. Even though there was no proof, Renji had not raped the women, and the wolves did not seem interested in doing so. Instead, they were more interested in destroying what was left of the Yamanaka clan. And although Ino, Inoichi, and Hiruzen himself knew the truth, no one else would believe them. Even the Yamanaka clan thought it was Renji's fault and blamed him for their big loss of reputation. After that happened, the Nara and Akimichi, who had been helping the Yamanaka as quietly as possible so they wouldn't become targets, quickly stopped helping. There was no way they could be linked to something like that. So, the Yamanaka had nothing and nobody left. Now, there was only one way for them to go, and that way was, unfortunately, down. At the moment, there was no way for things to get better, so they would just keep getting worse until they could no longer call themselves a shinobi clan. He had to wonder if that was the plan all along or if it was just a happy surprise for the wolves. If Naruto was really involved, he thought it was planned. And to think, all of this could have been avoided if Hiruzen hadn't been in such a hurry to get the information he thought Naruto had. He knew some pretty dangerous secrets, but that wasn't what they were looking for, and Inoichi couldn't even figure out how much Naruto knew that was secret. Because of this, he blamed himself for the whole mess. They got nothing out of what he did, and the only thing it did was push Naruto away. Before the event, he was getting along well with the boy, but now everything was over. No, you're not lost. You just moved. To Danzu, the Sandame Hokage still couldn't believe he had driven the boy, of all people, to Danzu. He thought of many possible outcomes for this situation, most of which were bad for the boy, but there were some that would be good for him. He would just have to sit back and let Naruto make his own choices. Trying to change the boy's life at this point could have terrible results. He hadn't tried to stop the war between the young man and the Yamanaka clan because of this, and also because he felt guilty about it. He was mostly to blame for how things got to this point and how Naruto ended up in this situation. Who was he to try to help when Naruto was doing so well? The Yamanaka would be a pretty big loss, and it would come right after the Uchiha, but it was necessary. Just like the Uchiha massacre, he would give up the clan like a sacrificed lamb, hoping that the wolf would eat it and be satisfied enough to move on. He just hoped that Naruto would move on to someone else's pastures and not turn his hungry eyes on Konoha's flocks. Most of them wouldn't be able to win. Danzu was waiting where he usually did. Naruto was glad for this break from work as he slid into the seat next to him. It had been a year, and things were getting better. It wouldn't be long before he could feel sure about letting his pack out into the world. The last part of the work was a lot harder than the work he had done to get everything set up. Still, it was to be expected. He was putting things in order so they wouldn't need his help as often. The plan was for Mai to take care of everything while Sai led the pack by himself. The two were used to working with each other and had gotten used to working with him. They would do well leading the pack while he was busy starting his shinobi career. Naruto, it's been a while. Then busy. He nodded to say, I have. Are you still enjoying retirement? You should know that I'm not really all that retired. Naruto pretended to be confused, even though he knew the old man in front of him was very good at reading people. Oh, you mean because you're an advisor on the Honorable Council? I guess that would be a lot of work and take away from the feeling of retirement. No, that's not what I meant, isn't it? What could you be talking about? I know you've been in touch with them because their sudden change in movement told me something had happened. It wasn't hard to figure out it had to do with you. I don't know how you convinced them, but I'm pretty impressed. I'm sorry, but I can't take credit for something I didn't do. Don't try to trick me, Naruto. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You've spent the last year turning them from a loose group of soldiers into a professional organization. You may have used shinobi who were already trained, but it's still amazing that someone as young as you was able to do that. Not everyone has what it takes. Still a little confused. Who? Danzu's mouth dropped into a deep frown. With the slightest of moves, two figures ran from behind the trees towards the former Uzumaki. Instead of the wolves he had expected to meet, two black chains stopped his men as they defended their leader. Naruto didn't waste any time putting them to death. In just a few seconds, his chains were around their necks and they were snapped with violent jerks. The frown on Danzu's face got worse. He had thought that the wolves would immediately stand up for their leader. Maybe they knew how smart their lord was and didn't think he needed protection. It was a pretty bold move, but it also made sure that they wouldn't get caught and that anyone who met with him would immediately feel like they had the upper hand. The false sense of security they had would probably bring down many men in the future. It wasn't smart to belittle Naruto. Danzu was pleasantly surprised to feel a blade against his neck. Danzu turned his head to the side because Naruto was still sitting in front of him and, as far as he knew, didn't know any good cloning techniques. Next to him was the snarling face of a wolf, and the person behind it didn't pay much attention to his captive as they both looked at their leader. He looked back at Naruto and raised one eyebrow. "So you still don't understand what I'm saying?" "Absolutely not, that's just a pet. Surely you know a real wolf when you see one." Danzu gave a snort. "Of course, that's fine. Now, call your mutt before I teach it about the order of things." The wolf-faced shinobi growled back, but when Naruto nodded, he let go of his prisoner. "Take care of the bodies and go back to the den. I'll handle it from here," he said. The wolf nodded and left with the bodies. "You know, there was a reason I left them as civilians." "I know, and I also know that you did that because you didn't need them. I, on the other hand, did. Either way, their training is put to good use, right? Are you trying to say that scaring the Yamanaka is a good way to use the soldiers I spent a lot of time and money on?" "I'm not, but I won't say it's not one of the ways I use them. Pretty much. I've recently tried to change things outside of Konoha and ran into members of your pack who seemed very lost. I don't know how they got so far apart. Damn, and there I was hoping to keep that a secret for a bit longer. You should know that plans don't always go as planned, Naruto." Naruto laughed and let out a snort. "The best plan was to keep it a secret. I was just trying to become well known in a few small countries before it got out that I wanted to play on a global scale. A smart choice, but one that doesn't matter much right now. Yes, I'll just have to make do. I'm sure I can drop 1 or 2 projects to finish some of the others as soon as possible. I'll take the hit, but at least I'll be better prepared for any others that may come after." Naruto, tell me how your pack fits into Konoha." "Of course, by hiding in the shade of the great tree. But you still have people in your pack who are far from the tree." Naruto just shrugged and smiled. "What can I say? We like to lie in the sun sometimes. The sun is no place for men like us," he said, and it was clear that he didn't agree. He thought the boy would answer better. "There are times when you have to go looking for food. We find the sunlight to be the most abundant. And what will you do with all that money?" Naruto's eyes became more serious as he looked into the older man's single eye. "I'll feed my wolf pack. There's too much for you to eat." As he spat in defiance, poison dripped off his tongue and onto the floor like acid. "Look at us." As she walked through the seedier part of Konoha, people stared at her. This made her hide behind her fluffy jacket. Men who were drunk even though it was early made fun of her, and the many dirty doves who were always around gave her dirty looks and sneered at her. She looked down at the paper she held tightly in her small hands and read the address again. She wouldn't normally be anywhere near this part of the village, but Naruto told her to come here, and she didn't want to let him down. She liked Naruto a lot, but not in a romantic way. She liked him more as a friend or maybe even a brother. He helped her when her family called her a branch member, and he continued to take care of her after that. He was the first person she could think of as a friend, and she had to wonder if he was what Neji would have been like if he didn't hate her. She shook her head at the thought and looked around to see where she was going. With the paper in her hand, she double-checked and then headed toward the small, one-story building that seemed out of place. With buildings that were 3 times its size on either side and dark red walls, it was hard to miss. There were no signs on the outside and no windows to look through, but she knew she was in the right place because she could see the addresses of the buildings next to it. As she moved toward the black double doors, she could see the drunk men's looks change from a leer to a look of almost shocked horror. As the women of pleasure tried to get away, the sneers and scowls they sent to her went away. She noticed the wolf-masked shinobi standing in front of each door as it opened. Even though she couldn't see their faces, she felt like the growling wolves were staring at everyone on the street as if daring them to do something. Then a girl, maybe 15 years old, came through the door. Her skin was very pale, and her long, dark hair fell in a long, straight line down her back. The bangs on each side of her calmly frowning face went past her breasts and landed near her navel. Even though many people thought Hinata was more beautiful, or would be more beautiful than the girl when they were both the same age, the girl couldn't help but be scared of the young woman. When she bowed low to greet him, that was put to rest. "Welcome, Hinata-sama. Our lord has been waiting for you." Hinata was, admittedly, a little confused. She knew that Naruto had friends in the village, but he had never said anything about a lord. Was this how he got the help he needed, by making friends with a lord? Hinata didn't wait long before she followed the woman after she asked, "Please, would you please follow me?" If Naruto thought she belonged here, she would believe him. As she followed the woman, she could hear the doors close behind her, and the two men move into place, ready for the next person to try to get in. She pushed her fear aside and followed the young woman. She was surprised when the second door they went through led them to a room with only a big staircase. Each corner of the room had a candle, and under each one was the face of a wolf. It took her a moment to realize that behind the masks were people, whose bodies were hidden in the darkness where the dim lights couldn't reach. Something warm and soft got tangled up in her fingers, and the woman smiled. "Can't have you getting lost now, can we?" With that, Hinata was led down the stairs and into the dark. Hinata didn't know how long they walked or how many turns they took, but she did understand why the woman had to hold her hand. Even if it was necessary, Hinata wasn't used to this kind of physical contact, and the pretty young woman intertwining her fingers with hers made her blush very brightly. "Come on, we're getting close." Hinata gave a shy why yeah and a heap of surprise when the woman pinched her cheek. She must have been talking about Naruto when she said, "Well, aren't you just the cutest thing? It's no wonder he took you under his protection." For a moment, Hinata wondered if Naruto thought she was cute too. "It's probably a good thing I'm escorting you, too. The wolves would probably devour such a timid little lamb." "Are really?" "Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm thinking about it myself." Hinata blushed even brighter, causing the woman to giggle. "I think you and I will get along fine, Hinata-sama. If you ever feel lonely, you can always come find me." The ex-heiress said, "Okay." Her face was completely red, which made the young woman laugh. That look of amusement, however, was wiped off her face the instant they stopped before a large steel door flanked by 4 guards. When they saw her, one of them walked into the room while the other 3 saluted the woman first and then bowed to Hinata, which confused her. When a loud knocking from the other side of the door was heard, 2 of the guards stepped further away while the final one held the door for the 2 women, permitting them entry. Entering, the last guard followed them in, shutting the door and taking his place beside it much like the first had done on the other side. It was a familiar face, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, that greeted her. "Naruto-kun." The young man looked up from his work and shot her a smile. "Good morning, Hinata. How's it going?" For a second she liked to imagine that he had actually asked about her personal life, something that filled her heart with warmth. But she knew the reality was he wanted to know about the going-ons of the Hyuga clan. She really couldn't blame him. Not only did he defy them by breaking the seal on her forehead, but he also risked their anger a year ago when he said he would protect her and put himself against the Yamanaka in public. So far, the Hyuga hadn't done anything, which was usually a good sign. If they had a problem, you would hear about it. Perhaps because it involved Hinata, who was not just a branch member but one whom they had been unable to properly brand. They didn't care or even hope that something would happen to her due to the conflict. She really couldn't say for sure. "They've been fine. How about you?" "The wolves and I have been doing wondrously, thank you. It's because of that I wanted you to come here. Seeing as we've finally managed to set ourselves up, I wanted to meet them. You're under my protection. These are the people who will be ensuring it." "I don't think I understand." "These are my wolves, my guard, my shinobi, my own personal army." Hinata's wonder had obviously been noticed as he paused. She didn't think he would have his own army, and not many people do. "Here, take some of them." When Naruto was asked, "What? Why?" one of the guards let out a low growl, but the redhead just smiled. "Of course, as your personal guard. I promised you would be safe with me. And even though the Yamanaka haven't bothered you yet and your clan hasn't decided what to do about your seal, I'd rather be safe than sorry." With a snap of his fingers, 4 masked individuals appeared. Each one was wearing the same dark gray uniform and snarling mask that she had seen on the others. But there was one thing that made them different, a single green X on the forehead of one of the masks. It reminded her of the cage bird seal, and she knew that was probably the idea behind it. "Come," Naruto stood, "let me introduce you to your protectors." Hinata had a feeling that things in her life were about to change, and not in a bad way. Had it already been nearly 4 years? She would ask where the time went, but she knew that it had gone into the many bottles that littered the Senju compound. Shizune had tried hard to keep the grounds clean and herself sober, but nothing had worked. Though she had, admittedly, kept the main house almost completely alcohol-free. 2 weeks after they moved to Konoha, Tsunade stopped drinking there and started going to the many guest houses and the gardens instead. Things had felt pretty slow as she lounged in the sun with her drink of choice, nowhere near as fast and hectic as her decade-long gambling spree that had flown by in an instant, but they had still gone far more quickly than she had realized. It felt like only months ago that she had stepped back into Konoha, and yet it had not been just a year, or even 2. But rather very close to 4 full years. There were few in the world capable of keeping themselves drunk for outrageous amounts of time, especially if they planned on staying alive in this violent world. But Tsunade was, much to her own shame, one of them. And now 4 years had been drunk away. Guilt briefly flashed in her heart. There was no doubt in her mind that Kushina had been anxiously awaiting word on the well-being of her son, and Tsunade hadn't even found the boy yet. Not that she had actually been searching, more concerned with studying the bottom of her bottles than locating the son of a famous shinobi within Konoha of all places, who here would hurt him. He could have been homeless for a few weeks before someone took him in as the worst thing that could have happened. There was Kurenai, too. Tsunade was sure that the woman had been trying to find the boy. He hadn't been brought here as far as she knew, so the chances of Kurenai having found him were pretty slim unless she had managed to get over whatever problems she had. But that was fine. Just because Kurenai hadn't found him didn't mean someone else hadn't. Hiruzen had admitted to knowing where the boy was living, though he refused to say in an attempt to respect the boy's privacy, which was absolute bullshit. Since Tsunade was his godmother, why didn't he just tell her where the brat lived so she could look at his chakra coils and be done with it? It really didn't matter at this point, though, did it? Even if there was something wrong, he'd be starting to go through chakra maturity at this point. If the Kyuubi's chakra really was dangerous, it was good that Kushina left with Naruto, and they could go back to school as planned. If it hadn't, well, she really wouldn't be able to tell at this point. Nothing seemed to come up concerning him and his health either, as Hiruzen hadn't sent for her. If there had been a problem, then she knew he'd want her, the world's greatest medic, to take care of it. So, as far as she knew, he was fine. Now, the only problem was coming up with a way to tell the worried mother that she hadn't written him a single letter. It must have gotten lost, only worked so many times, and she couldn't really use it to explain why she hadn't heard anything about Naruto's health in 4 years. If she told the woman that Naruto's network was fine and exposure to the Kyuubi's chakra would cause no damage, then Kushina would be furious that she had not been notified earlier so that she could return. On the other hand, she had no real way to tell her that she had been right and had made the correct decision in separating herself from him, and yet she had not told her that. It would have helped Kushina a lot to know she had done the right thing. But she hadn't heard anything one way or the other. There really was no winning for Tsunade at this point. No matter what she said, the fact remained that she had kept the worried mother in the dark for years. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But Kushina was more than just a woman. She was an Uzumaki mother whom Tsunade had kept from her child. She might have to go back to gambling her way through the elemental nations. It could buy her a few months at the very least, long enough to drop Shizune somewhere she'd be safe and find herself a nice little town to be buried in. Kushina would be out for blood. Still, why would the woman leave her son again so soon after coming back? She doubted it, and chances of him leaving when he was about to graduate the academy were slim, so he couldn't join his mother in her hunt. She might survive a bit longer then, maybe even escape the Uzumaki woman's rage completely. She scoffed at her own thought. There was no escaping in Uzumaki's wrath, it just didn't happen. And unfortunately, this was not a problem her beloved Sake could fix. Well, not that she had any left. The stores of the Senju clan was vast, but she had managed to completely empty them of everything alcoholic by herself in a mere 4 years. Had she not been the greatest medic in the world, her liver would have failed 10 times over. Oh, master, was there something you needed? Tsunade hadn't even heard Shizune enter the house. How long had she been home? No, just thinking. Shizune sent her master a curious look but otherwise left it at that. It was odd for Tsunade to be in the kitchen, seeing as she usually spent her time drinking in one of the guest houses. Actually, it was odd to simply see Tsunade not drinking, especially at this time of day. She should be at least 12.5 bottles in by now, and that was on slow days. Hey, Shizune. The silence was broken by Tsunade's voice as her apprentice looked up from her search of the fridge. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Have you heard anything about Naruto recently? Unseen to her, Shizune frowned. You know, if you told me why you're looking for him, I would know what things to listen for. You still haven't even told me why we came back to Konoha. Tsunade thought about it for a moment before letting out a sigh. We moved here for him, she admitted. Her apprentice sent her an incredulous look. We moved here for him. What on earth does that mean? I know his mother. She asked me to come keep an eye on his health while she was away. An eye on his health. She asked you, the greatest medic to ever live, to look after his health just because she knew you. Surely any trained medic would have worked. There aren't a lot of combat medics, but Konoha has plenty trained to work in the hospital. Shizune knew there was more to the story, and Tsunade, realizing this, gave another resigned sigh. And the boy's godmother, Shizune said as she slowly shut the fridge and walked to where her master was sitting. He doesn't know, does he? Her voice was soft but carried a noticeable edge. Not unless Kushina told him. And you decided not to go looking for him. All he knows about you is that you're one of the Sannin. You don't mean to tell me you expected him to come to you, do you? Is he even aware that his mother is concerned for his health for whatever reason? Does he have a reason to seek you out? I've looked and one of his mother's students is keeping an eye out. She was going to send him to live here at the compound if she managed to find him. Neither of us have been able to locate him yet, despite our best efforts. Tsunade looked up in confusion when Shizune scoffed at her. That's a load of bullshit and you know it. I saw him just last month at Ikaraku Ramen and the month before that at a shinobi store buying kunai. He's not that hard to find unless he's trying to hide from you. You saw him and didn't tell me. Shizune scoffed at her again. Tell you what, that I ran into Naruto again, had a friendly chat, and continued on with my day. Why didn't you bring him here? You know I've been looking for him. No, I know you've been waiting for him to show up while you've been drinking all day. What did you expect me to tell him? Come back to the Senju compound and meet Tsunade. I don't know why, but she's been looking for you isn't something you'd tell someone. That would have worked perfectly well. He doesn't need to know why I'm looking for him. I'm Senju Tsunade for fuck's sake. Just a chance to see my breasts should have had him coming back with you. You really don't think highly of him, do you, Tsunade-sama? What on earth are you talking about? I told him you were looking for him. When I couldn't tell him why, he scoffed at me. A legendary kunoichi wanting to meet you for reasons unknown is beyond suspicious, and only a fool would accept it at face value. He's 11 years old. He should have been thrilled to meet me. I met him when he was 8 years old. At that time, he was just called the Little Thief, and he was not at war with the Yamanaka. He's what? Shizune lifted a single eyebrow. Have you left the compound within the past 2 years, Tsunade-sama? He ended up declaring himself their enemy not too long after his 10th birthday. Renounced his Uzumaki name from what I hear, too. I don't believe this. How could it have happened? The details are pretty fuzzy, shrugged Shizune, surrounded by a lot of rumor and speculation. If you really want to know, you'd have to ask Naruto himself. You know I can't find him. That's because you're not really looking. With that, Shizune left the room. She was right and Tsunade knew it. The Sannin had never wanted to find Naruto, perfectly content to let things sort themselves out. At first, she had wanted to avoid the boy who had just lost his mother. He'd have been confused, hurt, and emotional, and she didn't want to deal with that or have him start thinking of her as a mother figure. As time went on, she realized that it would have been easier then, and explaining everything, including her absence up to that point, would be far more difficult for her to do. The explanation was put off for the next day, and then the next, and then for weeks after that. She knew that as time went on, he was less likely to believe any explanation she came up with. What a way that would have been for him to meet his godmother. But now, having put it off for 4 years, she had probably lost all rights to call herself such. And for reasons she could not explain, the loss of the godson she had never met hurt her just as much as every other loss she had ever suffered. Perhaps being in his life would have helped her close the wounds of her past, the wounds she drank to forget. Maybe, just maybe, she could have found in her godson another reason to keep on living. One to give her life purpose after Shizune left her to start her own life. Senju Tsunade would never know, and that doubt would haunt her for the rest of her life. There was both excitement and hesitation with every step she took, each one bringing her closer to her village, her home, her son. It had been 4 years now, 4 years, 1 month, 6 days, and 10 hours since she had last seen her son. Next to her, Naruto was practically dancing in excitement as they made their way closer to the village hidden in the leaves. But each step Kushina took was slower than the last. She was happy to be coming back, to be able to see her son again after all this time. But she was worried. She had left a note explaining everything within the compound, but Naruto wasn't able to access it. Hiruzen knew of her reasons, or at least had a good understanding of them. But had Naruto been told by the old cage? The Sarutobi head had voiced his disagreement with her plans many times before she had left, and she knew that his refusal to write any letters after the first was because his suggestion was the same. Come home. But she couldn't. He should have known that. Then again, he wasn't the professor for nothing. Perhaps he felt it better to risk exposing Naruto to more of the Kyuubi's chakra as she sorted everything out than to rely on what little of her plan remained. Of course, one also had to realize that leaving behind her baby boy was the hardest thing she had ever done. If she had returned, she knew she wouldn't have been able to leave again. She couldn't do that. Couldn't risk damaging Naruto's coils with the presence of the Kyuubi's chakra and taking away his chances of ever being a shinobi. He had always wanted to become a shinobi so he could keep her and his sister safe. She couldn't take that away from him. She just had to hope that he would understand why she had to leave and why she couldn't come back to take care of him. Baruko's training had gone well, and that meant she didn't have to worry about anything concerning her daughter. It gave her a lot of time to spend with Naruto. In fact, it left all her time for Naruto. She would make sure Naruto got even more training than he asked for. Every second she had available would be devoted into making Naruto the shinobi he wanted to be and making up for all the time she had spent away from him. The first thing she was going to do when she saw him was sweep him into a big hug and cover his face with kisses. She'd make sure he knew exactly how much she loved her baby boy, and that she was never going to be leaving him like that again. Come on, Ka-chan, faster. I want to see Nyai-kun. Naruto was just as excited as she was, if not more so, and had no worries making her hesitate. She hadn't been the one to leave Naruto, Kushina was. Naruto was simply taken with her. It had been difficult at first for the girl to be separated from her brother. The two were often close by, Naruto keeping an eye on her to make sure she was safe, and to be so far away from him and know it was going to be years until she next saw him was hard on her. It had taken a little encouragement and a few mentions about how proud her brother would be. But once Naruto started training, her skills grew by leaps and bounds. Most curiously, however, it had been her ability to call upon the chakra of the Kyuubi no Kitsune and keep it under control that had gone by the fastest. It was almost as if the Kyuubi wasn't just letting her take the chakra, but was actively helping her control it, which was a ridiculous thought. Still, Kushina didn't know much about the seal her husband had used all those years ago, and she wasn't the only one. The Shiki Fuin was not something used often, and as a result not much information was available. Perhaps it was the seal that allowed her daughter such control over the volatile energy that made up the strongest Biju. No matter what the reason was, Kushina was glad to know that her daughter had such power if anything ever happened to her. Few could go against Jinchuriki, even fewer against one who could call upon large quantities of a Biju's chakra and retain their mind. It wasn't meant for humans to be able to use it, and the results were terrible. Smiling, Kushina looked down at her daughter. Faster, you say? I don't think you can handle faster. Naruto pouted. I can too. I bet I could get there faster than you. That sounds like a challenge, stated Kushina as she raised a single brow. Go for it. Then it's a race. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Before she could even finish counting, her daughter started running as fast as she could toward the village where they lived. Home, where everyone in her family would be together again. Her heart leapt in joy at the thought. They were the Uzumaki, and there was nothing more important to them than family. Chasing after her daughter, Kushina let her thoughts drift to thoughts of her son's smiling face and sparkling purple eyes. She couldn't wait to hold him again. With every step, she felt more uneasy, but she kept going. She could hear whispers getting louder by the second, and people on both sides of the street were watching her as she made her way to the house she hadn't been in for 4 long years. This attention was strange, and it immediately made her suspicious. She had been to every big country and a few of the smaller ones, but it didn't make as much of a stir as her return to Konoha did. People who knew who she was and people who didn't pay much attention to her as she went about her business in the hidden villages. Or, at the very least, they should not have made such a big deal about any mind paid. Was it because so many people in this place knew who she was? Did they possibly not think she'd come back? She felt sick just thinking about not coming back for her son. They couldn't have thought she planned to leave him here and spend the rest of her life outside the great walls of Konoha, could they? Sadly, she couldn't say she'd be surprised if they had. Few people knew she wanted to leave, and only 2 knew why. Admittedly, it was way too easy to come to such a bad conclusion. Such thoughts didn't help her troubled heart much. She was trying hard not to notice how people around her avoided looking at her, so she was only vaguely aware that she was picking up her pace, and that her daughter was having trouble keeping up with her long, fast legs. As the sea of people in Konoha's main market district dwindled into the much more manageable light traffic of the hidden village's more residential areas, she started to feel more and more worried. She knew he wouldn't be there when she got back, waiting for her with a smile on his face and his arms wide open, ready to give her a tight hug. But a secret hope lived deep in her heart, and she prayed to whatever gods might hear her that he had found a way into their house and spent the last 4 years living there comfortably while he went to the academy. That same part of her, that foolishly optimistic dreamer, made her want to come here before going anywhere else. Even if it was just to get them to drop what they were doing and go find her son, she had listened to it, silently praying that that part of her might be right. She knew it wasn't going to happen. Planned compounds went by her like leaves blowing in the wind. Hyuga, Aburame, and Inuzuka. Within minutes, she was standing in front of the white walls of the Uzumaki compound. Even though Naruto had been violently turned away by the security measures of the compound, there was no evidence that anything had happened. She knew it could be because of time and whoever had found her son after the accident, but a small part of her was proud to say it had never happened and Naruto only had to learn the lesson. She might have let herself believe that part of her if it didn't also keep insisting that he had found a way inside. When she put her slightly shaking hand on the gate, she felt the seal's familiar warmth as they responded positively to her touch. With a small click, the bronze double doors swung open just enough to keep them from locking before she could get inside. With just a light push, one of the doors swung open far enough for her and her daughter to walk in without any problems. The door had moved quietly, as if it hadn't been used in a few years, but she didn't let that give her any hope. Since she'd lived in Konoha, these doors had never been oiled. They were simply made with such skill that they didn't need any upkeep. Time had forgotten who made the doors that decorated the outside of the compound. But she knew it wasn't her ancestors. Maybe it was a gift from a group that didn't exist anymore and used techniques that would never be known again. No way of knowing. Kushina moved quickly across the yard, closing the doors behind her. Naruko's head was just barely able to stay above the grass, which was as high as her navel. She got to the door in a few seconds, but stopped for a moment at the threshold of her home. Did she dare confirm what she already knew? Could she face the lifeless emptiness that waited inside? She took a deep breath and looked at her impatient daughter before turning the doorknob. But even though she had opened the plain brown door, her body would not move any farther. She didn't actually get into the house she had always thought of as home until Naruto pushed her and she took a couple of clumsy steps. Nothing was on the floor except a thin layer of dust. Shelves and bookcases full of pictures and oddities were exactly the same as they had been years ago. There was none of the warmth she usually felt in the house. Instead, it was a cold, uncaring building that didn't care about the family's problems. When she went to the kitchen, she found the note she had written so long ago exactly where she had left it. Unopened, it laughed at her from the dark wooden table. She wanted to blame the innocent paper for a moment, but she knew that in the end, it was all her fault. She would have felt better, though, if she had left the letter with someone so that even after he was turned away from the compound, he would still know what was going on. In hindsight, everything is clearer, as the saying goes. When she left the kitchen to go to her own room, she didn't pay much attention to the fact that the dishes from the last meal the three of them had as a family were still in the sink, unwashed. After 4 years, it might be easier to just throw them away. As she slipped through the empty hallways, she found her room just as clean and tidy as the day she had left it. Anyone who knew her would be surprised until they realized that the only reason it was clean was because she had brought all her things with her on the trip. She took her scroll out of her pouch and threw it on the bed, wondering if she should unpack now or wait until she knew where her son was. She could always spend the day getting settled in her new home and look for him the next morning. She knew she could easily put it off, and she could also go to the academy to look for him. They only had about a week left, so there was a good chance that he would be there. But she couldn't do that, not after leaving him the way she had. She needed to find him to make sure he was okay and tell him everything her letter had not had time to say. But there was still that feeling of wanting to wait, to put it off until later. It would be hard to face him after not only making a huge mistake, but also leaving without warning and breaking up what the Uzumaki held most sacred. She knew it must have hurt him that she left without saying goodbye, but she also knew that saying goodbye would have hurt just as much, if not more, and she didn't think she would have been able to continue with the trip if her crying son had been left behind. She was sure that he would not have let her go without a fight, and she would have had to stop him from chasing after her when she left. Even doing that wouldn't have helped much, though. He would have gone after her as soon as he could, even if it was a few months later, but he would never have found her. Fearing that he might have tried to follow her and all the horrible things that could have happened to him if he did, she had the courage to leave. Even if he hadn't seen her leave, he would have been tempted to try, but his mother knew him well enough to know that he probably wouldn't go through with it. Seeing someone leave and knowing they were leaving made the trip seem easier. If he had known they had vanished without a trace, he would have hesitated and thought about it. If he hadn't been so emotional, he would have been able to see that chasing after them was a bad idea. It should have bought her enough time for him to read her letter before his Uzumaki rashness took over and made him act without thinking. The letter should have told him to go to Kurenai, which would have made sure he didn't run away and let him know there were people who could help him while his mother was gone. Her plan had worked, but only in half of the way it should have. She knew he had stayed in Konoha, but he hadn't read her letter or gone to Kurenai. Or, she hadn't heard from her former student that Naruto was staying with her. Even so, that didn't mean much because the two women had barely talked to each other in the past 4 years. She did, however, hear that Naruto had gotten better after the compound kicked him out and was often seen around Konoha. Kurenai had never said anything beyond that. No news could have been a good thing, meaning nothing bad had happened. But it could also have been bad news that she didn't want to tell. She was going to find out soon enough. She decided to unpack later, so she went to her daughter's room and giggled softly at the mess she saw. Naruko hadn't bothered to unpack in an orderly way. She had just opened all of the seals at once and let her things spill out. Kushina watched as Naruko sorting things half-heartedly, which mostly involved her throwing things into her open closet. Naruko, sweetie, just leave it alone for now. let's go find your brother before we do anything else. When Naruto's brother was mentioned, she immediately stood up and started walking over, ready to go. Alright, let's go see Naruto Nyai. She waited almost right after she said that. Kasan, where's Naruto Nyai? That was an excellent question. They went to Kurenai to find out what she knew. Maybe he was staying at the Senju compound with Tsunade and her apprentice, acting like a prince. He could have been taken in by Kakashi or maybe even Tuchai. She might have wondered about Mikoto, but news of the Uchiha massacre spread quickly. She didn't really believe the rumors that there were survivors. Her best friend was probably dead, since she was the wife of the clan leader and the mother of the traitor Itachi, who had gone crazy and killed his own family. Hiruzen knew most of what was going on in Konoha, so going to see him might not be a bad idea. But he was busy, and a trip to the academy would let her know where her son was staying and how he was doing at school while she was away. So what was the best thing to do? What was the best option? I don't know, my little sunflower, but I promise that we will find him. Lastly, what happened to her son? As it opened to let them in, the creaking of the wood was barely audible. Like the compound, nothing had changed in this office since they were there last. Unlike the compound, it stayed warm and inviting, like someone had lived there for a long time. Considering how much time he spent sifting through mountains of political nonsense, it was totally understandable. Hiruzen, he didn't bother to look up from his never-ending work, so his head snapped quickly upwards to see who was talking. Kushina, have you finally decided to come back? Even though he gave a small smile that might have fooled Naruto, Kushina was painfully aware of the accusation in his voice and knew that when he said us, he really meant Naruto. Even though he understood why she needed to leave, he had never agreed with it. She often wished she had listened to his advice. It was too bad that the past was so hard to change, because if it hadn't been, she might have had a chance to undo her mistakes. Yep, Naruto answered on behalf of her mother, grinning brightly at the old cage. We just got back, Gigi. Kushina did not miss Hiruzen's reaction when she called him old man with affection. He had always been treated like a member of the Uzumaki family, which made his reaction seem strange. How often had she called him Gigi? How many times had Naruto done something like this before? She couldn't remember him ever jerking back like he'd been hit before. She was willing to bet a lot that it was related to her son. That's fantastic, Naruto-chan. Did you work out hard while you were away? The girl nodded enthusiastically and was almost jumping in place. I worked hard at training, Gigi, and super strong now, Naruto proclaimed. I'm going to take that hat away from you soon. He laughed loudly and then gave her a smile. No problem, Naruto-chan. Going back to retirement sounds great. He turned back to Kushina and continued. Now, was there something I could do to help you, or are you just here to see an old man? Kushina only hesitated for a moment because she couldn't say what she wanted to say. Even in her head, they sounded bad, but to actually say them. Still, she needed to know, and few answers came without her asking. We wanted to know where my son was. She shuddered as her voice reached her ears. Her plans had him staying at home, but they fell apart almost immediately. Then, who was it that had cared for her son while she was gone? Who else would have been there for her son when he needed someone? Kurenai would never have said no to Naruto, but her daughter's words at the start of the trip made her wonder if her former student and son really got along as well as she had always thought. Kurenai might not have said no, but had Naruto even gone to her? Obviously, you wouldn't know where he lives now, would you? Hiruzen was shuffling through his desk, looking for a blank piece of paper when he poked Kushina with a sharp object. He pulled one out and started writing down an address right away. After pausing, he looked into one of the corners. How many apartments did he have? 116. 108, I believe, answered a voice without a body, which was probably an ANBU guard hiding in the shadows. Hiruzen gave a nod. Yes, that seems to make sense. We appreciate it, monkey. Yes, Hokage-sama. He called Kushina closer and handed her the address. He has been living here for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 3.5 years now. If he isn't there, Hiruzen gave a weak shrug. Then I honestly don't know where you could find him. Even so, Kakashi might know. I think he's been checking on the boy pretty often. She was relieved to hear that someone had been watching out for her little boy. She'd have to go thank Kakashi later. She should have known that Kakashi would want to make sure Naruto was alright. Even if he had been an ANBU captain, he would have made time for Naruto. However, she wasn't sure if it was good for her son to spend time with the perverted veteran shinobi. She might have been better off just asking Kakashi to watch Naruto while she was gone. At first, she was worried that having Kakashi watch her son would hurt his ANBU career, but maybe things would have been fine. Of course, she didn't choose Kurenai because she was afraid Naruto would become a mini version of Kakashi who was perverted. Nope, nada. Thank you, Hiruzen. We will have to have you over for dinner soon so we can all catch up. Now, if you will excuse us, I have to go see my son. So, she left the office quickly, almost dragging a waving Naruto behind her. When the door was shut and Hiruzen was sure that they were far enough away to be safe, the professor let out a long breath. Kushina wasn't going to like what she found out about her son's life over the past few years, but at least he wouldn't have to tell her himself. He felt sorry for the unfortunate person who would have to do something like that. He wouldn't wish his enemies a mad Kushina. When trying to stay out of sight, noise can help. When you're instead sitting in a classroom waiting to take your first real step into the world of shinobi, that same noise can be annoying. All around him, children talked loudly with their friends and neighbors, eager to finish the test and get their headbands. He knew it was strange to think of people the same age as him as children, but compared to him, that's all they were. No one here had killed anyone, and no one had been a part of the shinobi world's politics or discovered one of its many dark secrets. They were innocent and naive, and he couldn't help but wonder if they should not graduate. There were, as always, some exceptions. Aburame Shino, a member of the always logical Aburame clan, was definitely the right person for this job. His parents and clanmates probably told him the truth about the shinobi world long ago, and had spent every day since then preparing him for it. Even though Nara Shikamaru was lazy, the heir to Konoha's Shadow Clan was very smart. Even if he didn't have what it took to do well in the dangerous world he was entering, he would know what he was missing and be able to make up for it through careful planning and preparation. It wasn't hard to see that the boy would make a good Chunin squad leader, and Naruto didn't think Nara was aiming for anything higher. But if he did, a command position could easily be in his future. The last exception was definitely the only Uchiha in Konohagakure no Sato and probably all of Hai no Kuni. That alone told a lot about what the boy had been through, and it didn't take more than a quick look at him to see that he was ready for whatever the dark world of shinobi had in store for him next. He didn't know if Uchiha Sasuke was more connected to Mikoto than being in the same clan, but he wasn't likely to find out anytime soon. All the information about the clan that was almost extinct was locked away, and Sasuke was not a talkative person. It was pointless to try to get him to talk about the clan he no longer belonged to. He'd have to just ask Mikoto the next time he saw her. There were some exceptions, but there were also people who were the worst examples of unpreparedness. There were many people who stood out, but Haruno Sekiro was the only one who made the others look bad. She was worse than most people, not just because she wasn't ready for the world she was about to be thrown into, but also because she thought she was ready for the life of a kunoichi. Just saying that insulted anyone who works in this field. She was a bookworm who could only rely on theory and good test scores. She didn't have any practical skills or real knowledge that mattered outside of Konoha. She was going to die, to put it in the kindest way. As a shinobi, she would have been killed on the battlefield. But as a kunoichi, there was a long time between her defeat and her death, which she didn't like. She didn't have the slightest idea of this sad truth. He could only feel bad for whoever she was working with, because she was likely to bring them down with her. Obviously, if she ended up on the same team as him, he'd help her straighten out. He couldn't still be working with such a liability, could he? When he thought about his responsibilities, he turned his attention to someone he would have put in the same category as Sakura without thinking twice. He didn't know what to think about Yamanaka Ino. Just by looking at her, you could pretty much tell how the Yamanaka clan is doing right now. Her hair, which used to be long and well kept, was now thrown into a messy bun that did the simple job of keeping it out of her face, which showed more signs of weariness than it did of makeup. Her clothes, which were still purple, were all rumpled, as if she had pulled them out from under a pile of clothes in the middle of the night while keeping her eyes covered. Her purple skirt had been replaced by thick purple pants, and he had a sneaking suspicion that, given the Yamanaka's financial situation, she only had 2 or 3 pairs. From what he had heard, she was doing a great job keeping the Mindwalker clan together, especially since she was only 12 and her father didn't help her much. It was still falling apart, but not as quickly as it would have if it hadn't been repaired. It was easy to tell that she was giving it her all because of how messy she looked and how much weariness clung to her, like the smell of the perfumes she had stopped wearing so long ago. Sadly, that wasn't nearly enough. Still, she knew more about the shinobi world than her old rival Sakura, and she probably realized how weak and useless she had been before. It was sad that a child had to grow up as fast as she did, but this would help her as a kunoichi. Obviously, he didn't care about the Yamanaka clan anymore. As it was, the people of Konoha made their lives hard enough, and the loss of reputation they suffered meant that their finances weren't doing much better. Tensions would go away as the Yamanaka slowly rebuilt their reputation and showed that they were still the skilled shinobi clan they had been before. Naruto thought it was similar to a phoenix, and he was the flame. They had been burned away and cleaned by fire, and now all that was left was for them to rise from the ashes more beautiful than before. If he hadn't been working with Inoichi, he might have doubted their ability to do it, but he knew that man would pull them through. As he kept letting his mind wander while still looking at Ino, he had the oddest thought. She looks pretty cute even though she is tired. Others were easy to ignore. Their laughing and talking didn't bother her, and the occasional comment about her looks didn't bother her anymore. But she couldn't ignore one thing. From across the room, cold purple eyes looked right through her, sending shivers of fear down her spine. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see him watching her almost lazily as she turned her head slightly. It was nothing like the predator she thought he was, but the way he was looking at her made her think he was planning to kill her. When the others looked at him, they might not have noticed, but she did. She knew the power he had, and she had tasted the bitter results of standing up to him. This room was full of children, and a big wolf was sitting in the middle of them, looking at them calmly as if they were sheep he was raising to eat later. They probably scared him just as much as sheep, or maybe even less. Things had not been easy for the Yamanaka, as the wolves had been successful in their mission to ruin their reputation and take away everything they were. If it weren't against her clan, she might have been impressed by how they did things. As it was, her family was suffering because of it, or more accurately, because of her. She had angered the wolf without realizing that what she saw hadn't even started shedding its sheepskin. And not even in her wildest dreams did she think that the wolf might have a group of friends. She should have, but when he gave up his name and said he was against her clan, she wrongly thought it was just him. At first, the rest of her clan had made the same mistake. They soon realized how big of a mistake that was. They were torn apart by the wolves, but not a single one of them was killed. One might have thought that Naruto didn't have what it took to just start killing them, since he had already killed Yamanaka Tatsuki. But they soon realized that he just wasn't kind enough to end their lives for them. No, his enemies weren't killed quickly. Instead, they were slowly ground into dust. The Yamanaka would never forget what happened. Strangely, he seemed to have stopped. Some people may have said that the wolves had stopped, but she knew that the wolves were his. How could those predators belong to anyone but the animal she sat with in this room? She knew he was a wolf because every time she looked into his eyes, she saw the image of a growling wolf. Those purple pools said a lot more than the masks his soldiers wore. But even though he stopped, the people of Konoha continued to make things hard. Not only could they get away with most things involving the Yamanaka because the ANBU was on their side, but after the Renji rape scandal, many people had stopped trusting mindwalkers. There weren't many jobs for the Yamanaka to take, and most places tried to take advantage of their situation by raising prices. No one was willing to help them. Naruto had done a fantastic job, and they hadn't even been able to attack him. There was no one they knew of they could go after to hurt him, no compound they could attack, and most people thought that the Yamanaka made up the wolves to blame their problems on. Her father did the right thing by not getting into a fight with him. He must have known how hard it would be for them to fight a foe who had no known ties to the village. Then, Ino found a tie that was just as difficult to catch as the wolf. She was glad that the Hyuga didn't mind Naruto teaching them a lesson. If he hadn't put Hinata under his protection, and the Hyuga clan had found out that she was trying to control their ex-heiress, things would have been much worse for the Yamanaka clan. In this way, Naruto breaking them down was probably a great favor, since he didn't seem to want to finish them off while he was doing it, leaving them to rebuild themselves. If she knew anything about her clan's future, it was that once they got back to how they used to be, they would be on Naruto's side for as long as she could see. She would make sure they did because she was the heiress. The most important thing she learned from this was definitely not to cross Naruto. Even though she was thinking, her friends kept talking even after the door opened again. She thought it would be Uruka, but instead it was a young girl wearing all orange with her long blonde hair and 2 pigtails. It took her a moment to realize that the girl was wearing the same outfit she always did, except that the color had changed. She watched the girl look around the room with interest until her bright blue eyes saw the wolf and seemed to get a lot brighter. Even though Naruto was calm, the girl could have felt that he was dangerous. Oh, she was joking, right? She was one of the few people who seemed to realize how dangerous he was to their survival. He could easily break them up, and most of her classmates didn't even know it. Ino knew what she had to do when she got to the big beast. Even though running a clan was hard on her, she moved quickly and grabbed the girl's shoulder when she tried to pass the Yamanaka heiress. As soon as the girl turned to face her, Ino was shocked by how much she looked like the wolf sitting in the corner. She knew about the Uzumaki, but it couldn't be. The last time she tried to stop someone from going to see Naruto, it didn't go well. But if this girl really was an Uzumaki, they didn't need her to make the wolf angry. All the clans knew that Uzumaki Kushina and her daughter left the village 4 years ago, leaving Naruto behind. Ino knew that if she were in his place, she wouldn't be too open to the idea of them just walking up to her like nothing had happened. She was probably saving this girl's life because of what happened to her clan. The way the girl almost growled what at her efforts, on the other hand, did not sound very appreciative. She walked down strange hallways, thrilled to be able to take the same route her brother had been taking for the last 4 years. She was sure that he would be here. After all, how could he miss the first day of what could be the most important job of his life? A week had passed since they got back, and she still hadn't seen her brother. The neighbors said it was his apartment, but he wasn't there and hadn't been when they went back a few days later. At one point, a girl a few years older than her left his apartment, but by the time they realized she was the only one who had been there, she had disappeared among the people of Konoha. When they asked, Kakashi didn't give them much help. He said that if they couldn't find him at his apartment, he could be anywhere in Konoha. It seems that the perverted Jounin usually ran into him while he was going about his business. She didn't know where her brother might spend his time when he wasn't at home, but he had suggested the academy or the practice fields around it. She thought he was lying when he said he had only met her brother by chance, but they tried his idea anyway. She didn't have any luck in the fields, and her mother couldn't get through to his teacher. From what she heard the Uzumaki matriarch say, she thought it had something to do with not being able to talk about students' private information. Since it was his mother asking, Naruto thought that was strange. They were looking for Kurenai, a former student of her mother's, but the woman, like Kakashi, only knew where he lived. She had said something about Naruto being private and independent, which meant she wasn't needed much. And then she said she had to run some urgent errands and left. It was suspicious, but Naruto had always made the Jounin uncomfortable, so Naruto knew she could be telling the truth but didn't like talking about it. Even though it was strange, it didn't really seem out of character for the woman she knew. When they weren't let into the Senju compound to talk to Tsunade, her mother started to think they were keeping her son from her. However, talking to Kato Shizune, Tsunade's apprentice, showed that he wasn't there and that Tsunade had probably locked herself in the compound after drinking too much again. It seemed to happen pretty often. Her mother might have been upset enough to buy it, but Naruto had a feeling something else was going on and no one wanted to be the one to tell them. When her brother's health was in danger, she didn't like how she felt. But that wouldn't be true anymore. Naruto would definitely be here today, and she still had to take the test. She'd find her brother, give him a big hug, tell him all about the trip, and then bring him home. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he saw her. She knew he was going to be so happy. When she got to the classroom where all the graduates to be were, she didn't hesitate to open the door and start looking for her brother right away. With everything going on in the room, she didn't draw much attention to herself. She looked at the excited students with her blue eyes until she found her target sitting in the back corner. His red hair was easy to spot, but she frowned a little when she saw that his eyes didn't move when she walked in. Instead, they just looked at a young woman who was untidy but still very attractive. Was that the person that her brother liked? She didn't look like much of a kunoichi, but maybe looks can be deceiving. Then again, one didn't have to be a capable kunoichi to get the attention of a teenage boy. Being pretty worked just as well, if not better. She shook her head off the thought and ran to sit next to her brother, happy to see him again after all these years. She had just reached the young woman he was looking at when someone put their hand on her shoulder to stop her. When she turned around to look at the girl who had her brother's attention, she let out a frustrated growl. What? Something about the blonde made her look a little surprised, but she couldn't figure out what it was. It only took her a second to get over the small shock she felt. Don't. It was easy, but that was a trick. In this situation, that one word could mean a lot, and Naruto didn't like it. Well, why not? She could tell that this girl was trying to stop her from going to see her brother, but she didn't know why. Did she think she could take her boyfriend from her? She was right, though. Before he was anyone's boyfriend, he was her brother. As his sister, she had the right to try to get his attention for herself. You don't know who that is at all. Naruto was almost laughing. She knew who it was, which is why she was trying to find him. What? He's not there. Since he's my brother, I can talk to him whenever I want. When the girl thought about dating her brother, she shook with real fear. If Naruto's fear wasn't so real, she would have taken it as an insult. She wasn't disgusted by Naruto. Instead, she was very scared of him. That would be something to look into later. What could have scared this girl so much about her nice older brother? Whatever you knew about Naruto, he is gone. She pointed at Naruto, who was warily watching the two of them because he knew that one of them was his sister. After all these years, he should have been happy to see her again. But his face was cold and emotionless, and his purple eyes seemed to judge her very existence. He might look the same, but you have no idea what he can do. With a sneer, Naruto tore her shoulder away. So what? You don't know the icon like I do. Naruto couldn't see how the amethyst pools shrunk when she said what she did. But the girl did. She stopped at that point, not because of what Naruto had said, but because she saw that what Naruto had said was clearly upsetting the wolf in the corner. She started walking again when there was nothing left to stop her. Before she could take her second step, she was stopped. Everyone, please sit down. The graduation test is about to start. Yumino Iruka had come into the class. Naruto groaned and sat down in the first seat that was free. It looked like she would have to wait a little longer before she could hang out with her brother. He was surprised to realize that he had almost forgotten his family, who had left him here in the leaves. He was sometimes reminded of them, but he never thought about them. He was too busy with the wolves and his shinobi training. Hiruzen once called it a training trip, but he hadn't given that much thought. It had been a trip, and every trip ended with a return. He totally forgot about that simple fact. He didn't think he would see them again. The wolves told him that they were back a week ago, but even then, he didn't think that he would run into them. At this point, he didn't know how he felt about them. His sons had left him, but he had found purpose and a sense of self in the darkness. Did he really want to fill his world with their light when he had found comfort in the shadows? Even more important, could he let them come back into his life? They had left him without even saying goodbye and hadn't written him a single letter in 4 years. Would it be worth the pain they would cause to let them back in? It would be easier not to deal with them at all, to carry on as usual while they were gone, and to act like they were still on their trip. His sister then came into the room. He wouldn't be able to stay away from them much longer than he had. Or, in other words, not for long. He had had a week to think at headquarters, but he still didn't know what he wanted to do. It seemed like a good idea to put off dealing with the problem until it was absolutely necessary. He could become a chunin and not have to worry about it as much if he could stay alive long enough. As a chunin, he would decide on his own which missions to go on and with whom. Kushina was a kunoichi, which means he was a friend, and so was his sister, who wore a headband with pride over her forehead. But that didn't mean he had to work with them. It would be best for everyone if they could just act like they didn't know each other. He took off his own headband from the desk and put it around his neck. He thought about putting it around his arm like Shikamaru did, but in the end he decided that he might as well use it to protect a large weak spot. At that moment, Iruka came back into the room after confirming the team formations one last time. They had already been decided based on who was thought to be able to pass, but any differences would have to be dealt with. Calm down, she said. Fresh Genin quickly stopped talking and listened intently to find out who they would be working with for the next few years. Iruka quickly started listing team formations because he knew they would lose interest as soon as he got their attention. Then there's Team 7, which will be led by Hade Kakashi and consist of Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto. Team 8 will be made up of Hyuga Hinata, Aburame Shino, and Inuzuka Kiba. Yuhi Kurenai will lead them. Team 9 is still going strong, so Sarutobi Asuma will lead Team 10, which is made up of Nara Shikamaru, Akimichi Chouji, and Yamanaka Ino. Before he spoke to the teams, Iruka looked over his papers one last time. All teams have 1 hour to meet their Jounin instructors at the training field assigned to their number. Avoid being late. Naruto slowly put up his hand. And of myself, Sensei. Yes, I've got that here. Because of how many graduates, Iruka gave Naruto a quick look, which a few of the other students caught. We don't have enough new genin to make a second team. Because of this, you are being placed in the active reserves to await an opening in a team or for priority placing during the next graduation, whichever comes first. It was hard to miss how angry he looked when he heard the news. Purple eyes stared accusingly at everyone in the room, as if they were the ones holding him back from starting his shinobi career for real. Iruka went on, giving a small cough. I have your papers and the official document that says what your status is right now. I'd recommend going to the shinobi registration office as soon as possible to get everything sorted. Even though it's unlikely, new chunin might ask you to lead lower level missions so they can learn how to do it. The better your chances are, the faster you take care of everything. Naruto stood up with a low growl and walked toward his teacher of 4 years, ignoring the whispers that started as he went by. He grabbed the papers that were given to him, and his hands were shaking with anger as he walked toward the door. 4 years, 4 fucked up years, and now he had to wait even longer because his sister wanted to come back for a team. It was nonsense, total and complete nonsense. He almost laughed without being funny. It made sense, in a twisted sort of way. As long as he could remember, his sister had always been extremely fortunate. He couldn't remember her ever wanting for something or having to work towards her desires. If Uzumaki's luck was real, he thought that she had taken his when he was still in the womb. It could explain the last 4 years for sure. He ran down one flight of stairs and through some hallways he usually didn't go through because he knew he needed to find a free training ground and work off some steam. Then he would have to tell Sai and Mai. The three of them had thought he would spend most of his time with the team, but now it seemed like he had a lot of free time. As he opened the school's front door, though, his plans took a slight turn. Uzumaki Kushina was waiting there, dressed like any other jounin, with her long red hair moving in the slight breeze. As soon as she saw him, she was surprised and happy, and her eyes got big and her smile got big. Still mad about not getting a team, he said the first thing that came to mind, with a voice as cold as ice and a tongue as quick and dangerous as a snake. "You're about 4 years behind schedule, right?" It was oddly satisfying to see her flinch in pain.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.